Israel recovered the bodies of 3 hostages held in Gaza, and we look at 3 escalation flashpoints that could turn this into a broader regional war. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8 a.m. Central on Friday, December 15th, 2023. Overnight, Israel announced the names and provided the pictures of 4 of their soldiers that they say fell during combat operations. That brings the total number of fallen Israeli soldiers since October 7th to 450. The Gaza Health Ministry and Al Jazeera updated their casualty information, saying that since October 7th, 18,787 Palestinians have been killed, along with at least 50,897 wounded. The number of Hamas militants killed and wounded are included in those numbers, but we don't have them at this point broken out separately. Then shifting to operations on the ground, looking at a couple maps here provided by War Mapper on Twitter. There's 2 really focus areas right now. In the north, Gaza City. In the south, Khan Yunis. And I think it's tempting at times to see this map and see the amount of territory that the Israeli forces have moved into and consider those clear. But I think over the course of the past week, it's been pretty obvious that those areas are not entirely clear of Hamas militants. So one of the larger fights that we saw since the ground offensive kicked off was a significant ambush carried out just last week, or earlier this week, against Israeli forces. 10 Israeli soldiers fell during that contact. That was in one of these areas that is already shown as blue. So it's not clear. There's still a lot of fighting going on, even in the places that Israel has moved through and established strong points. And the same is going to go in the south and around Khan Yunis. Just because Israeli forces are on the ground and physically holding that territory does not mean that they are immune in any way from attack by Hamas forces that could be using some of these underground networks and the tunnels to pop up behind where the front line appears and take Israeli forces under contact. Israel yesterday said that they recovered the bodies of 3 hostages that had been taken on October 7th. 2 of them were military personnel, Nick Beiser and Ron Sherman, and then 1 civilian, I believe is the correct breakdown here, Elia Tolenado. Those 3, it sounds like during the course of military operations in Gaza, Israeli forces were able to identify those bodies, recover them, and move them back into Israeli territory. Additionally, Israel said that they thwarted a Hamas ambush in Gaza where their forces were lured in by Hamas using loudspeakers to play the sounds of children screaming in Hebrew. So the Israeli forces heard this, thought that they were near some potential hostages being held by Hamas, moved into the area through some narrow alleyways, and the entire area was set up to ambush the Israeli forces. They uncovered multiple explosive devices, IEDs, along that alleyway. And as they neared the source of the sound, they said they came across a couple Hamas militants near a tunnel entrance in the vicinity of a school and some residential compounds. It doesn't look like this ambush was successful and carried out, but in the aftermath, Israeli forces were able to uncover the explosive devices, the weapons that were going to be used, as well as the loudspeakers that were playing those children's voices, kind of luring the IDF in. Shifting over to Hamas, they claimed responsibility for more than 15 attacks against Israeli forces over the past 24 hours. Now, each one of those claims could be multiple attacks, right? It's not as though one small arms engagement and Hamas calls it and moves on. It could be a complex attack like we've seen recently, IEDs, RPGs, and small arms, or a series of attacks against Israeli forces in a certain portion of Gaza. As a part of that, Hamas said that over the past 72 hours, they have completely or partially destroyed 72 separate Israeli military vehicles. I want to see at some point a total roll-up here. The total number of Hamas claimed destroyed Israeli military vehicles has got to be north of 400 by now, which we're starting to get to the point, if we're not there already, of Hamas claiming they've destroyed more vehicles than Israel moved into the Gaza Strip in the first place. So we have seen some footage put out by Hamas in the last couple days showing successful strikes against some of these vehicles. But one of them put out yesterday on baseline, it looked like a detonation against the side of an Israeli tank. But as you slow it down, you can see that it's actually the trophy system activating and intercepting that round. So we have seen a handful of destroyed Israeli military equipment, to be expected in any war, especially an urban fight like this, to include a couple tanks that have been towed off the battlefield. But 72 in 3 days, I take that with a grain of salt. That seems a little bit high. Now, there's three areas to keep an eye on where the war in Gaza could escalate. And we're going to start with the West Bank. The West Bank inside of Israel is not getting nearly as much attention as Gaza, which is understandable given the scope of the military operation happening in Gaza. But the West Bank is far from peaceful right now. So the IDF just wrapped up a 2.5-day operation in Jenin. According to Israel, they said their forces searched and reached hundreds of buildings, detained suspects for questioning, of which about 60 individuals were arrested and transferred for further investigation. They confiscated over 50 weapons, and they put out a video showing some of these confiscated weapons of various types, ammunition, materials for preparing explosives, military equipment, and many weapons parts were found. Additionally, they say Israeli fighters, located over 10 underground tunnel shafts, 7 cargo laboratories, and 5 observation posts designed to monitor Israeli forces in the region. They say all of this was subsequently destroyed by Israeli forces. They also say that during the course of this 1.5-day operation, Israeli Air Force elements attacked 2 squads of terrorists who threw explosives and grenades at Israeli forces. Those aircraft killed 7 terrorists and wounded multiple others. Israel says overall, more than 10 terrorists were killed during the course of the 2.5-day operation. We don't always get this, but it does appear to have been confirmed in the number of casualties here by a statement from Islamic Jihad that they put out on Telegram, listing the names of 12 of their members that they say fell over the past couple days during the fighting in Jenin. Then during the course of this operation, Israel said that 7 of their soldiers and 1 officer were slightly injured and were all evacuated to a nearby hospital. Now, big picture, looking at the West Bank, how this continues to simmer, and the violence has never really stopped, but it's never really ramped up to the point where it's going to take a significant effort away from what the IDF is doing in Gaza. And then Al Jazeera says that since October 7th, 289 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, along with at least 3,365 wounded. There have also been Israeli citizens killed and wounded since October 7th in the West Bank. We've seen ramming attacks with cars, some gunmen firing on Israeli civilians, and stabbing attacks. I haven't seen a roll-up of the total Israeli casualties in the West Bank, but needless to say, the violence there is very much continuing. Then shifting up north to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah claimed responsibility for 17 separate attacks against Israeli territory in the past 72 hours. The response to this, as expected, are multiple Israeli strikes into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah targets. The result of those Israeli strikes have led to at least 105 total Hezbollah fighters killed to date. Now, these are fighters announced by Hezbollah as having fallen in the ongoing war with Israel. So that number could be higher, but what we've seen publicly as of today is 105 Hezbollah fighters killed. Now, this northern front, while there's a lot of violence in the West Bank, and Israel is definitely keeping an eye on that, this northern front with Hezbollah is really where a full-scale war could kick off in the near term. I don't know that I would necessarily say it's either more or less likely today than it was on October 8th. There's kind of factors playing in both directions. But a fight with Hezbollah, between Israel and Hezbollah, is much closer to a conventional style war. There would still be unconventional elements to that fight, but what we're seeing in Gaza is closer to counterterrorism, counterinsurgency type operations. Hamas does not have anti-aircraft capabilities. They do not have, for all of the rockets that Hamas has, it's nowhere near the inventory that Hezbollah has. Just the quantity of fighters, the quantity of equipment, and honestly the experience that Hezbollah has gained fighting in Syria over the last nearly 10 years at this point. The front to the north, while still relatively stagnant, again, fighting going on both sides of the border, this is an area where if it does kick off, you're going to see tanks rolling across the border, significant artillery barrages, and a major air war. It's going to be a very, very different fight in a lot of ways than what we're seeing in Gaza. Then, while not a direct, immediate military threat to Israel, the Houthis down in Yemen continue to ramp things up in their own way. Now, I don't want to write off the Houthi threat to Israel entirely. They have launched multiple drones and missiles against Israeli territory that have all, to this point, I believe, been intercepted. But when Israel's looking at what a direct military confrontation could look like in terms of escalation, more of the focus is going to be up north with Hezbollah. But either way, the Houthis down in Yemen continue to kind of throw a wrench in a lot of plans here. So according to the Houthi spokesperson, They put out yesterday, quote, "The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces, with the help of God Almighty, carried out a military operation against the Maersk Gibraltar container ship, which was heading to the Israeli entity. It was targeted by a drone and the hit was direct." Worth noting, that ship, the Maersk Gibraltar, denied any claims that their ship was hit. Then earlier this morning, the Houthis put out another statement saying that with the help of God Almighty, the naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation against two container ships, the Alanya and Platinum, that were heading to the Israeli entity and were targeted by two suitable naval missiles. They said the Yemeni armed forces confirmed that they continue to prevent all ships heading to Israeli ports from navigating in the Arab and Red Seas until they bring in the food and medicine that our steadfast brothers in the Gaza Strip need. So that has been the Houthi claim now for a couple weeks, is that they're going to target. It started with targeting Israeli ships until more aid made its way into Gaza. That has expanded now to any ship heading towards Israel, or if Israel is one stop on the ship's route, that ship is now at risk of being targeted. Now, there were reports that one of these vessels was successfully struck and that a fire was on board and the crew is working to extinguish it. I haven't seen the details as to which ship that was or the current status of the ship and its crew. According to Reuters, they say that 23,000 ships each year pass through this strait connecting the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea. And they say that the average daily rate for supertankers operating in the region was $40,000 per day last month, which is already a ton. But $40,000 a day last month has risen to over $60,000 per day right now. So that is the very direct near-term impact that the Houthi attacks on commercial shipping are having. And I would imagine as they start to target more ships more frequently, that's just going to continue to rise. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. Substack now also has ad-free, sponsor-free videos that go live about 1 hour before they're up on YouTube. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.